Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Karen Ball, welcome to the conversation today.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Cincinnati. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about the Prosci ADKAR model of change management. I'm a change management guy. I love talking about change management generally. And anytime I have a chance to talk with someone about a really powerful change management model, I think it's a lot of fun. Models are fun. You know, they're always overly simplistic, of course. That's what a model is. But they're really useful lenses through which we can view the world in a way that we can process really complicated things to help us make useful sense of really complex phenomenon to then, move things forward. And so that's really what we're going to do today. And you're going to help us unpack this and better understand it. As we get started, I wanted to share Karen's bio with everybody. Karen Ball is a dynamic and collaborative organizational leader, instructor, and client advisor. She thrives on engaging and energizing individuals in diverse learning environments. She discovered her passion for discipline and of change management in 2006 when she was first introduced to the Prosci ADKAR model and knew immediately that it would have a profound impact on the rest of her career. I love that. And is there anything else you would like to highlight by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
Yeah, thanks, John. No, I think we'll probably dive in a couple of additional places, but I'm 40 years into my professional career, so I've had many, many years to observe what's happening and to really start imagining what the future looks like. So I'm excited to be here and to share.
Awesome. Well, let's start then. There are a lot of models out there, right? There's lots of change management models, lots of models generally when we talk about the consulting world. We talk about management consulting, executive coaching, all those sorts of things. So what is it particularly about the ADKAR model that caught your attention and that is something you've kind of latched onto as something that you find super powerful?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Like you said, models help us make sense of things that are quite complex. But we have to watch for the models that are, too simplistic and too reductive. And I think one of the things that was so fascinating for me when I was first introduced to ADKAR, and I'll explain for the listeners that it's an acronym, and there are 5 letters, and the first A is awareness. The D is desire, K is knowledge, A is ability, and R is reinforcement. And it's a model that describes the 5 building blocks. It's a sequential model, but it's a description of the way that each of us go through change, become aware of why a change is needed. We make a decision to support and participate in the change. We know how to change. We convert knowledge into ability by becoming proficient, being able to say, I am able. And then finally, the change needs to be reinforced so we don't revert to previous behaviors. But I was first exposed to ADKAR in 2006. And coming into that time, I was an information technology professional. So I was working in information management, information governance, very large scale corporate compliance side initiatives that organizations were spending millions of dollars on technology and hoping for adoption. And certainly we know that adoption is the driver for benefits realization. If people choose not to do what we're asking them to do, the business case is thrown out the window. So I was really fascinated by the concept, and I always called it, I didn't really have a language for the challenge that I was seeing. I always called it being an end user advocate. Because I didn't know, about the change management discipline and what was being resolved through that lens. But I was actually at a client, and the client invited me to sit in on a workshop that was happening one afternoon while I was on site. And Prosci was coming in and delivering a workshop for people leaders to explain to them how to help their direct reports through change. And I was introduced to the ADKAR model. And I had one of those moments, I still remember the day and the room and the people and the workshop because it was that moment where I said, aha, this is the missing piece. So I did a deeper dive, of course, on change management as a discipline and ADKAR as a model, and have since then discovered truly how impactful it is to see change through the lens of the individual progression and sequence of the ADKAR model.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for that background and explanation, for laying out, the meaning behind it, but also your personal history with it. Because, personally, I just always find it fascinating to learn those sorts of stories, why they resonate with people. Because I do think, that's half of like the compelling reason, for why these sorts of models, are interesting to me. Because I think just like anytime we talk about like quantitative data, the data itself is interesting, but it's the story behind it that is really compelling to me. It's the same thing with really powerful models. The models themselves can be really insightful, they can be really powerful, but it's also it's the story that you tell with the model that ultimately is what captures people. So I appreciate that. You've explained a little bit about how you were exposed to it. Can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind the development of the ADKAR model, and really how has its use been evolved in the context of change management over time? I mean, I think some of that's implicit, in the way that as you described the ADKAR model itself, but like the whole field of change management has evolved quite a bit over the last 50 years. And so the use of the ADKAR model itself will have evolved just as the field of change management has evolved. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. Well, the ADKAR model it does have a great origin story, I just recently wrote an updated publication on ADKAR for Prosci, and I had an opportunity to go back and connect with the author, the creator of the ADKAR model. His name's Jeff Hyatt. He, in the late 1990s, was an engineer working for Bell Laboratories. And if you imagine, what was going on in the late 1990s, there was so much talk about business process analysis and redesign.
Yeah.
And he was just fascinated with the question and the observation of why some changes succeed and others fail. So when he left Bell Laboratories, he took that on as a mission and a purpose to really examine what was sitting behind the successes and the failures. And his, engineering lens, of course, lend to, an initial assessment around process. Well, maybe it's process. Maybe it's project management, the way that changes are being introduced. Maybe it's the solution itself. And he came to the discovery that it was really, all of those things are contributors, but really one of the most significant aspects was the people side and how people are supported and equipped and enabled through change. So Jeff set out on a journey. He studied change patterns with over 700 organizations and tried to articulate what were the conditions of successful change. And that's where the ADKAR model was born. And, his observation was that, each one of those awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement are outcomes. Because if we go back and look at change management as a discipline, we've seen all kinds of lists of activities, right? We immediately go to, communications and training and engagement with leaders inside of organizations. But Jeff was really trying to discover what was it about the outcomes that each of those activities are intended to produce. So how do we know we're communicating effectively? We know we need to communicate about change, but how do we know we're doing it, and how can we track our progress, and how do we know people are receiving our messages and making their appropriate journey through the change or changes being introduced? So each one of them is an outcome, which is a really fascinating application of the model. It's not activities, it's outcomes. So that means we can measure them and we can describe them and we can assess them and we can diagnose what went wrong in changes through the lens of ADKAR. So more than just, checklists of activities, it's the way that we know we're doing the right things and measuring our success with those activities. It's both individual and organizational. It's both personal and professional. So it applies in any context of change and any size of change. So it was really
Yeah.
Jeff's work. And I reconnected with Jeff through the process. It was one of my stretch objectives. He had stepped away
Mm-hmm.
from his founder role with Prosci when I had joined in
Mm-hmm.
2016. And it was great to connect with him and go back and really reflect on his work and, to capture the essence of his origin story accurately.
Yeah, interesting. Once upon a time, way back when, I mean, this was a couple decades ago, I did a similar sort of project, um, looking at the origin stories of organizational development as a field. Um, and your story of just going through this process just reminded me of that. I don't want to go into any great detail here because it's not really the point of this conversation, but I'm just reminiscing on that experience, and there's just a lot of power in going back and talking to the innovators that create these types of movements and these types of great resources that then shape the field, shape the industry, that carry forward and impact all of us and impact organizations and employees across the
Yeah.
world. It's really
Well, I
awesome.
mean, that was in the late 1990s.
Yeah.
And, if you think about, how many years have taken place since then, we've now got almost an additional 20 years of
Yeah.
research and application experience and success stories. And, how we demonstrate the use of models like ADKAR in practice. So, things really, when you talk about the discipline of change management changing, it has to be reflective of the nature of change inside of organizations and where we're heading with, more rapid pace of change, more complex changes. But the essence
Hmm.
of the ADKAR model, and I think one of the things that, rings true with me and thousands of change leaders around the world who leverage it, is that change is individual. And if we're not able to
Yes.
unlock the individual change process, we have no hopes for unlocking complex organizational change. So it's really fascinating. It all goes back to change is individual first. And when we can model and repeat and increase our success at the individual level, organizational change is just the composite of all of those successful individual changes, right? We call it an ADKAR journey for everyone
Hmm.
going through their individual change in the context of large, more complex organizational change.
Yeah, so framing it up as like the ADKAR advantages, as we were prepping for this, I'm thinking about the three ADKAR advantages that were kind of spelled out in preparation. That the ADKAR advantage number one being that its focus is on the individuals. Advantage number two, that it's used how groups of people make the change, and number three, how organizations become better at change. Let's talk through those. We've already hit on the first one quite a bit. Um, it's the strength of its focus on individuals within the change process. Maybe you can talk just a little bit more about how the model is informed and facilitated individual change personally or professionally. But then I want to get into like how this then leads into, like you were just saying, like it's the aggregate of these individuals, right? Or how the groups of people, the groups of these individuals then together derive change and make this change. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. Just a quick reflection on the individual side of change. One of the things I did in the book is I incorporated ADKAR stories from
Mm,
over 50 people around the world, 20 countries, 6 continents, and both personal and professional, because I want to make the model real and relevant. My first exposure for ADKAR was in a personal scenario, right? And it was so incredibly impactful to see where a change that I was hoping for my son was stuck. And ADKAR gives us a diagnostic assessment to actually identify where someone is in their ADKAR journey, where the barrier point is. And it's so action oriented. You would know immediately where to focus attention, right? Is it on awareness? Is it on desire? Is it on knowledge, ability, or reinforcement? So there's lots of individual stories. Graham learns to swim, and Anna Boleyn gets her son to eat broccoli. But there's also, Catherine, who's taking on, a personal change to make a significant career transition and how she does that through the lens of ADKAR. So there's some great examples in there of how to assess, how to look at barrier points. And I think, John, the most important aspect, again, is the action orientation. Is ADKAR becomes both sense making, it helps us make sense of change, but it's also way finding. How do we find our way both through individual and organizational change? So since it's outcome oriented, you can scale it from tens to hundreds to thousands of people who may be going through change. So when we look at how groups of people go through change, we take actions more holistically. So in many cases, in an organizational context, I'm looking at how do I effectively communicate the compelling why for a change, because awareness is about understanding why now, what if we don't,
Hmm. Hmm.
what is not changing. Because unless someone has an awareness completion rate, they're not going to choose to participate in each of those sequential elements becomes insufficient for progress. So the how groups of people make a change is understanding, what is the nature of the change? What is changing? Why are we changing? Who is changing? How are they impacted in that change? Who are the people in the organization that they're going to listen to get the key messages to make their own ADKAR journeys? And how do we support and equip and enable that through a methodology? So ADKAR is actually a model, but there's an entire methodology that surrounds that and how we activate sponsors and leaders and how we communicate, when we communicate, what we communicate. Where learning and advancement through proficiency and ability comes into play. So there's, some great examples. There's a pharmaceutical company that has 50,000 employees with 5,000 migrations that were happening in a digital transformation, and they architected that change through the lens of our ADKAR, creating the change experience intentionally to get through those 5,000 migrations along their digital transformation journey. So the complexity can go from, as I said, Graham learning to swim to a, 50,000 person pharmaceutical company leveraging ADKAR for major digital transformations. So again, the scalability is critical, that we understand that change is individual, but organizational change is the composite of all of those individual changes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, change is an individual process and then it gets aggregated. We have people making the change in groups. Um, and then we have organizations becoming better at change. You highlight the importance of building change capability in the book. You've also talked about earlier, just like over the last few decades, like how we do change in organizations has changed. And change management today is not change management, 10 or 20 years ago. Now the name of the game is all about change agility. It's all about being able to, have a culture of continuous change. And it's not about like going through like a cycle of change or a change process. It's really about like embracing continuous change. Can you speak more to that and how the ADKAR model fits in with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of those areas, right? If you think about exercise, right? We isolate muscles and build
Hmm.
them so that we can become stronger to accomplish certain things. And building a change muscle inside of our organizations is just like that. You have to isolate the capability, get the knowledge and skills, have the right sponsorship, the right performance metrics, the right processes. There's a whole set of organizational constructs that need to come around building change as a capability. And you talk about this in, chapter 8 of your the future leader, about agility and, readiness for change. But the important aspect is that organizations have to take on building change capability as a change, right? They have a current state of perhaps immature or low capability, and they want to build a higher level of capability. So change management takes change management. Building change agility requires that we build, those agile mindsets and
Yeah.
capabilities. So it's all a package, and it's all about, the decisions we make as leaders of organizations to build that capability. But it's the right way to treat our people, and it's how we're going to optimize outcomes from all of these complex and rapid paced changes that are happening.
And it's hard because certainly people don't like change. I mean, that is a constant in human nature, that I don't see changing anytime soon. And so we talk about change agility. We talk about trying to create this culture of embracing continuous change. Yet we're still human animals that like consistency. We like security. We're like hardwired, from an evolutionary psychology standpoint for those types of things. And so there's no wonder that we have resistance. And so we can try to create environments where people are more open, less averse, and those sorts of things. But it's always going to be a bit of a challenge. Can you speak to, like, in this increasingly complex world, this challenging world of work, and increasingly challenging world for organizations and for leaders, um, given the fact that we're still human? What do you see as the path forward for change management and for models like the ADKAR model, and the advantage, in how we can use it in shaping the future of leadership, HR, change management, all of this, generally, but also disruptive technologies, AI, all of that. Sorry, that was like a huge question, but like,
There's a
how do we
lot
move
there,
forward?
John. Yeah, no, it's fascinating, right? We can bucket all of those things into changes that are happening more fluidly, more continuously. There's no future state, right? Everything is in constant flux. Because as soon as we get good at something, it's time to, go through a continuous improvement or change cycle. And I think there's two messages in there I like to convey is one is as organizations, we need to recognize and come alongside the fact that there is a people side of every change. So every technical side of change has a people side. Someone or lots of someones have to engage, adopt, and use the whatever solutions are being designed, developed, and delivered. And whether that's AI or it's continuous process improvement or it's the reimagining of, org design and workforce structures to support future state requirements. But, organizations really need to acknowledge and recognize that there is a humanness to every change. And once we
Yeah.
step into that, right, you can't unsee the people side of change. And the second part is every person needs to understand and acknowledge their own change journeys. I love it when I hear conversations inside of an organization where someone says, you know what, I really feel like I have a knowledge barrier point to be successful in what we're doing. How can you help me, people leader, change management resource, HR professional? How can you help me go through my knowledge gap so that I can be successful? So, part of it is organizations seeing people differently and helping them through their change journeys. And the other part is people acknowledging their own change journeys. And one of the things ADKAR does is it gets common language to a common
Hmm.
process. So, I'm hoping that, as people imagine the future, that change readiness is a decision, but it's also a
Hmm.
capability and it's one that organizations and our leaders need to sponsor and support. And there's specific actions they can take to do that. So I'm just hoping that in the future, right, everyone feels, empowered through their own change journeys to ask questions. Why is this change happening? How is one change related to another? To answer the questions that they have. So together we can accomplish what we're trying to accomplish and deliver successful and sustainable changes that we have to implement inside of our organizations.
I love it. Karen, this has just been a really fascinating conversation. I think we could go on and on. I do note the time. I need to let you go here in just a minute. But before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, your book, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, to connect, you can certainly go to prosci.com, prosci.com. You can look me up personally on LinkedIn, Karen Ball 26 on LinkedIn. The book is called The ADKAR Advantage, and it's available on Amazon Global Marketplaces and, of course, in just about every audio platform that you might want to be a listener of the book instead of a reader of the book. But I think that the key message for me, John, is that, once you understand the individual change process, it's so empowering for us as individuals inside of our organizations, and it gives a lens that allows us to focus on how we support, equip, and enable people through change. And at the end of the day, that makes us unstoppable in our organizations when it becomes part of the culture and the DNA, how leadership looks at people and the change process and how we engage people through that. So it's a win-win-win as far as I'm concerned, win for people, win for the organizations, and win for the families of everyone coming home from work saying, I had a better day today because my organization
Mm,
supports and equips me through change.
I love it. Karen, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Karen can do for you. Check out the book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.